COVID-19, the lockdowns that have come with that, the recent unrest and the country's economy are just some of the pressing issues that have characterized President Cyril Ramaphosa's tenure. Now, one analyst believes that communication is important on the country's challenges. Ray Hartley of the Brenthurst Foundation says rather than another well-meaning, overly cautious display of lukewarm leadership, decisive and urgent action is necessary in 6 areas if challenges are to be overcome. Well, he will expand on exactly what he means in this discussion that we are now getting into. We'll also be joined by brand reputation management advisor Moen. Let's pick up with Ray Hartley for the time being. Mr. Hartley, thank you very much for your time. Those 6 areas that there needs to be decisive action on, which are those at the moment?
I think that we can summarize it essentially as decisive action to free up economic activity, I think is the most urgent priority. Because, I mean, we've seen the jobless numbers, the state of the economy is dire. And even compared with other peers in the developing world, we are lagging further and further behind. So economic reforms to open up the economy, to allow it, make it much more easier to start businesses, to remove the red tape that's been promised many, many times, but it's still there. That makes it difficult for new players to enter the economy. And sorting out energy, I think, is vital. And obviously then the structural sort of economic reforms that would start to get manufacturing going, get employment going, free up the economy, basically allow more participants to enter, start businesses and employ people.
Yeah.
I think the consensus now is that if there's going to be growth, it's going to have to come from the private sector. I think government has pretty much run out of road when it comes to borrowing and spending. And there isn't much more that government can do to employ. It's already, I think, way probably overstaffed, and productivity is declining in government, and it's becoming a burden on the economy.
Yeah, okay. So these are very, very important areas indeed that you mentioned. How has the president fared in terms of providing leadership?
I think he has made a start. So, for example, I think he was fairly decisive when he said that, you know, that private energy generation up to 100 megawatts would be allowed. That was a surprise. It was definitely a reform in the right direction. And the other moves that he's made, looking to corporatize Portnet and to try and get the ports competitive, is vital. I mean, I think our port system is one of the largest ports in Africa, but it's one of the slowest functioning and most expensive as well. It's beaten by ports nearby like Maputo, who are far better at speed of processing cargo and the cost of processing cargo. So those kinds of moves have been mentioned, but they're very sporadic, and they're always qualifications that then lead to some sort of lengthy bureaucratic delay. So, for example, the announcement of the 100 megawatts was accompanied by an announcement that there would be a requirement for a grid permit to be obtained from the Department of Minerals and Energy, which is one of the slowest moving and least kind of effective, efficient government departments. So there is hope. There are signs that he wants to grasp the nettle, but he's always taking another step back. And I think, he needs to kind of embrace the identity of being a reforming president that day after day steps in to unleash some of the economic potential that's in the country.
The unlocking of that economic potential of the country, Ray, is also, I suppose, dependent on how much leeway he gets politically. But before we get that, because I suspect you're going to say that's going to be the hard part, but the relationship that his administration has with the private sector, given your statement that growth as things stand now will have to come from the private sector because a government has basically run out of road. How much buy-in does he have from the private sector?
I mean, I think there is buy-in. I think that the opportunities have always been there. But we have there's a lot of friction in our economy, a lot of frictional costs. If you start a business here, you have to comply with and deal with a whole lot of factors that you don't really experience in economic destination. So there's a lot of regulation, red tape. It's very hard to compete with these huge corporations that dominate the economy because of the way that collective bargaining is structured. So, for example, in metalworking, when an agreement is reached by these huge companies and the big unions, that is then automatically passed on to every single company, no matter how small and no matter when it started up. They have to comply with these sometimes very onerous agreements that make it financially really difficult for them.
Yeah.
And so we have a very small startup economy. I think, if you look at, we're in quite an interesting situation now. The ministers that are running, or the people that are running government's economic program, will be the president, the Minister of Minerals and Energy, Gwede Mantashe, the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana. And what do the three of them have in common? Mm-hmm. It's quite astonishing. They are all three former General Secretaries of the National Union of Mine Workers. Mm. And if you add into that mix the Minister of Trade and Industry, who's a former General Secretary of the Clothing and Textile Workers Union. So you essentially have people, coming out of a very particular economic approach that have their hands on the levers of reform, economic reform in government. Mm. And as a result, it's been quite slow and painful. And I think if you mentioned the political side of it, Ramaphosa is in a deep factional fight within the ANC, and his support within the ANC, and it's reflected in those appointments that I've mentioned, comes out of the trade union movement, and ironically, although he came out of business, out of the left in the ANC, broadly speaking. And so that is a break on how reformist Ramaphosa can be. He always has to factor in not alienating any more constituencies within the ANC, because he is in this fight to the death with the RET and Jacob Zuma factions.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you've gone to politics, because I was going to come into that, but you've done that already. Let's bring into the conversation Solly Moen. As I mentioned earlier, he would be joining us, a reputation management specialist. Solly, you join us on the line, and you recently wrote an article whose title was Ramaphosa's mission to prevent the ANC from splitting seems to be lost. And I don't know if you caught the tail end of Ray Hartley's contribution as far as the politics side of things are concerned. Take us into your confidence about exactly what you mean when you say he seems to be failing to join this party together.
Can you?
Yes, we can hear you now.
This line is really bad. Wondering.
Oh.
But if you continue.
All right, Solly, I think we can hear you now. And I was asking the question based on the article you wrote, that President Cyril Ramaphosa's efforts to try and keep the ANC united, they seem to be failing. Is it a foregone conclusion that perhaps the ANC is at some point going to see a split?
Yeah, I think the ANC must accept that the only way for it to heal is to, well, two things must happen. Either it must lose power because it cannot find its soul again while it's still trying to, it's not actually it's failing. That's the one thing. The other thing, it must split because I don't see how it will happen between the people, the ANC people who have coalesced around Zuma and the ones that are trying to coalesce or coalescing around that they don't seem to be wanting anymore. It's like all relationships, they have to get to a point where they accept that they can't just stay in power so that they can share the spoils of South Africa. They need to leave so that South Africa can.
All right, Moen, that line to you, not playing ball at all. Ray, let's conclude the conversation, and I just want to use actually exactly what Moen has said, that on the one hand, yes, there is an effort from Ramaphosa to try and unite a party that seems to be just pulling on different ends. And he concludes by saying the ANC must split. Do you agree? And if it does, who is going to benefit? I think you're muted.
Apologies. There we go, caught out by the mute button. Sorry, Claudia. I think the ANC has effectively split, but remains in one party. I mean, it's quite an astonishing and unique sort of situation that we're in, because there is total disagreement between these two factions of the ANC, and a whole range of people are suspended, and others are facing disciplinary action for what they've said, but they remain within the ANC. And I think that starts to stretch the credulity of the ANC. I mean, you know, I think they could be saved by the postponement of the October local government elections. If there was an election next month, they might be severely punished by voters, I think, because of this complete disarray, disorganization, and failure really to project a single clear identity to them, which is vital in communications and absolutely vital in elections. And I think in the past, voters wished the ruling party in local government elections. In 2016, they did. And I suspect they would do the same if this election were to go ahead in October. So from the ANC's point of view, I think they have to start losing some of the damaging baggage that is attached to the party and be prepared to then forge ahead without the people who have been implicated in corruption, actually losing them and accepting that they will become political opponents.
Ray Hartley, thank you very much for your contribution to this discussion, although I must apologize for the bad lines or the bad sound there. That's all due to technology, unfortunately, but at least we're able to get the gist of what these two analysts that we had brought on to try and analyze the area, or should I say the environment in which the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa, both of the party and of the state, where that is at the moment.